Welcome back, everyone. I'm Joe Bayad. I hope you're all doing well and staying on the side of goodness. I'm doing well too, and by the grace of Allah, I'm trying my best to stay on the side of goodness. Today's story is entirely fictional. The setting, characters, and events have been written in a way that may feel very real, but none of it is based on actual events. In the quiet village of Shalika, located in the southwestern region of Bangladesh, there was one place whose name people spoke only in hushed voices: the Red House. The house was nearly 80 years old, a two-story building made of red bricks, surrounded by towering mango trees and an old pond covered with green moss. Strangely, during the daytime, it looked like an ordinary abandoned house, but after sunset, no one dared to even walk past it. Some claimed that lights appeared inside the house at night. Others said an old man could be seen standing silently on the balcony, and a few even insisted that voices could be heard coming from inside around midnight. Yet, despite all the rumors, neither the police, the local authorities, nor anyone in the village had ever found any proof. It was these mysterious stories that convinced four friends from Dhaka to visit the Red House: Riyadh, Nabil, Siam, and Arif. All four of them were content creators. Their plan was simple: spend one night inside the house and uncover the truth behind its terrifying legend. After arriving at the village, they met an elderly local man. The old man stared at them silently for a long moment before speaking. The house itself isn't evil. The four friends exchanged confused glances. Then why is everyone afraid of it? The old man slowly replied, "The house isn't evil, but those who live inside it aren't human." Without saying another word, he turned around and walked away. Later that afternoon, the four friends stood in front of the Red House. Its main door was half open, as if it had never been properly closed for years. The moment they stepped inside, an icy gust of air sent chills down their spines. Broken portraits still hung on the walls. A thick layer of dust covered the floor. Every wooden step on the staircase creaked beneath their feet. Nabil switched on his camera. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then suddenly, Arif stopped. "Do you guys smell that?" A strange fragrance floated through the air, like old-fashioned perfume, but no one had lived in the house for decades. Riyadh laughed. "Probably just the smell of old wood." At that exact moment, from the upper floor, they heard it. Knock, knock, knock. All four slowly looked toward the staircase. No one was there, yet the footsteps sounded unmistakably real, as though someone was slowly walking above them. Siam whispered, "We're all downstairs." Before he could finish speaking, one of the upstairs doors slowly opened by itself. Beyond it, nothing but darkness. Then, from somewhere inside that darkness, a faint voice whispered, "After all these years, we finally have guests." The four friends froze in place. Nabil's camera was still recording, but none of them noticed that on the camera screen, there weren't four people standing inside the house. There were five. Riyadh tightened his grip on the flashlight. The beam remained fixed on the staircase. There was no one upstairs, yet it felt as though someone was watching them from behind the darkness. Nabil slowly began climbing the stairs, his camera still recording. Arif whispered, "I think we should leave." Riyadh smiled confidently. "We've come all this way. Let's see what's really here." The four friends carefully made their way upstairs. The hallway was covered in dust. Paint peeled from the walls. At the very end of the corridor stood the same door that had mysteriously opened moments earlier. But now, It was closed again. As Nabil placed his hand on the doorknob, 3 knocks echoed from inside. Knock, knock, knock. Everyone froze. Riyadh slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, an old wooden chair, a broken mirror, and a dusty rocking chair. It looked as though no one had entered the room for decades. Then, without anyone touching it, the rocking chair slowly began to move, back and forth, back and forth. Arif swallowed nervously. Is that the wind? But every window in the room was tightly shut. Not a single breeze could have entered. Nabil recorded every corner of the room. Everything appeared perfectly normal through the camera. Deciding they had seen enough for the moment, they went downstairs to have dinner. 11 p.m. The 4 friends sat together in the large living room. Nabil began reviewing the footage he had recorded. Suddenly, his face turned pale. His hands started trembling. Riyadh, you need to see this. Riyadh leaned closer. On the screen, the 4 of them could be seen walking upstairs, but behind them, there was someone else, a tall, unnaturally thin figure. Its head hung low, silently following them up the stairs. None of them had noticed it while they were there. Riyadh replayed the footage. Again, the same figure, walking only a few steps behind them. Then, the mysterious figure slowly lifted its head. It looked directly into the camera. It had no eyes, only endless darkness where its eyes should have been. At that exact moment, the video stopped by itself. The camera screen went completely black. A single sentence appeared on the display. Now there are 5 of you. The temperature inside the room dropped instantly. Siam whispered, "But there are only 4 of us," before he could finish. Footsteps echoed from upstairs again. This time, not 1 person, not 2, dozens of footsteps. Step, step, step. It sounded as though an entire crowd was walking across the 2nd floor, but the house was supposed to be empty. Or was it? The 4 friends stood frozen. Then, a shadow slowly emerged at the top of the staircase. It said nothing. It simply stood there, behind it. 4 more shadows appeared, one after another. 5 figures. Their height, their bodies, their posture. They looked exactly like Riyadh, Nabil, Siam, and Arif, as though the house had created another version of each of them. Suddenly, bang! The main entrance slammed shut on its own. All 4 ran toward the door. They pulled, they pushed, but it wouldn't move. It felt as though someone on the other side was holding it closed with incredible strength. In that terrifying moment, they finally realized the truth. Escaping the Red House was never going to be easy. Riyadh threw his full weight against the front door. It wouldn't budge. It felt as if someone on the other side was holding it shut with impossible strength. The air inside the house grew heavier with every passing second. Nabil whispered, "Let's get out through a window." The 4 of them rushed toward the nearest window, but the moment they looked outside, they froze. The courtyard they had walked through only hours earlier was gone, in every direction. There was nothing but a sea of thick white fog. It was as if the entire world had disappeared. Far away, a lone figure stood motionless within the mist. Slowly, it raised one hand, beckoning them closer. "Come!" Arif's voice trembled. Is that a person?" No one answered. At that exact moment, a deafening crash echoed from upstairs. Crash! The sound of shattering glass. The 4 friends immediately grabbed their flashlights and ran upstairs. The door to the room with the old mirror stood wide open. Inside, the mirror had cracked straight down the middle. But something far more terrifying caught their attention. There were only 4 of them standing inside the room. Yet the mirror reflected 5 people. The 5th figure stood silently among them. Its head hung low. Its arms were impossibly long. Riyadh slowly stepped toward the mirror. He stared at his own reflection. Then, his reflection smiled. But Riyadh hadn't. His heart nearly stopped. He stumbled backward in horror. At that same instant, every reflection inside the mirror slowly raised its head. Their eyes were completely black. Then all 5 spoke together. "One of you will stay here." Instantly, every light in the room went out. Darkness swallowed everything. A few seconds later, the lights flickered back on. Riyadh looked around in panic. Then he screamed, "Where's Arif?" Only moments ago, Arif had been standing beside them. Now, he was gone. His flashlight lay abandoned on the floor. So did his camera. But Arif himself had completely vanished. Instead, the mirror now showed 5 clear reflections. The 5th one slowly lifted its hand and beckoned them from the other side of the glass. Then, a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. "Riyadh, open the door. I'm outside." Everyone froze, because they all remembered one thing perfectly. The door had never been closed. So how could Arif possibly be outside? Or worse, if someone was calling from the hallway, who or what was it? Silence filled the room. Then, the voice echoed through the hallway once again. "Riyadh, it's me, Arif. Open the door." This time, his voice sounded weaker, almost as if he were injured. Nabil slowly reached for the doorknob. Before he could touch it, Riyadh grabbed his wrist. "No! What if that isn't Arif?" The moment those words left his mouth, the voice outside began to laugh, softly at first, then louder. One person laughing, then 2, then dozens, until it sounded as though hundreds of people were laughing throughout the entire house. Ha, 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 the terrifying echo shook every room. The 4 friends stood frozen in fear. Then, the broken mirror began to move again. This time, the reflections inside were moving on their own, even though none of the real people had moved. Riyadh stared in disbelief. His reflection slowly stepped closer to the glass. It stopped only inches away. Then it silently moved its lips. No sound came out, but Riyadh clearly understood the words. "Run!" His heart pounded. Suddenly, the reflection looked over its shoulder. Terror spread across its face, as if something far more horrifying had appeared behind it. Then, boom! The mirror exploded into thousands of sharp fragments. Darkness swallowed the room once again. Seconds later, the flashlights flickered back to life. Broken glass covered the floor, but every shard reflected something impossible. Inside each tiny piece of glass, a single eye stared directly at them. Hundreds of eyes, watching, never blinking. Siam screamed, "Run! Downstairs!" The 4 friends rushed out of the room and raced down the staircase. But the moment they reached the first floor, they stopped dead in their tracks. The large living room was no longer abandoned. It looked completely different. Antique furniture filled the room. The walls were freshly painted. A ceiling fan slowly spun overhead. It was as if the house had traveled decades into the past. Then, voices drifted in from the next room. A woman called out warmly, "Dinner is ready. Everyone, come to the table." A little boy came running past them, laughing, smiling, as if he couldn't even see them. Behind him walked a middle-aged man. Then, another family member. It looked like an ordinary family living an ordinary life. But something was terribly wrong. Their lips were moving, yet no sound came out. Suddenly, every member of the family stopped moving at exactly the same time. Slowly, they all turned toward the four friends. Their eyes contained no pupils, only endless blackness. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then all of them spoke together. "You're too late." Every door inside the house slammed shut at once. Bang! At the top of the staircase. The mysterious fifth figure appeared once again, but this time, it wasn't alone. Standing beside it was Arif. His face showed no emotion. He slowly raised his head. Then, in a calm and lifeless voice, he whispered, "Now, it's your turn." Arif stood silently at the top of the staircase. There was no anger on his face, no smile, no fear. He simply stared at the others without blinking. Riyadh took a cautious step forward. "Arif, is that really you?" No answer. Arif slowly began walking down the stairs. Knock, knock, knock. Every footstep echoed unnaturally through the house. Nabil whispered, "Something's wrong. Listen to the way he's walking." Riyadh looked closer. Then his blood ran cold. Arif wasn't actually stepping on the stairs. His feet hovered several inches above them. He was floating. Suddenly, every clock inside the house began chiming at once. Dong, dong, dong. 1, 2, 3. They tried counting the chimes, but they never stopped. It sounded as though hundreds of clocks were ringing together. Then, every light went out. Complete darkness. Out of the silence, a little girl's voice whispered beside them, "Hide!" The voice was so close, it felt as though she was standing right next to Riyadh. He quickly switched on his flashlight. In the corner of the room stood a little girl, about 10 years old, barefoot, wearing a simple white dress. Terror filled her eyes. With a trembling hand, she pointed toward an old wooden door at the back of the house. "They're coming!" The moment she finished speaking, she disappeared, as if she had never existed. At that exact moment, a heavy dragging sound echoed from upstairs. Skrr! Skrr! Something enormous was being dragged across the floor, slowly. It began moving toward the staircase. Nabil whispered, "What is that?" No one answered. They sprinted toward the back door. It was old, rusted. It took all four of them to force it open. Beyond it lay a narrow hallway. At the end stood a tiny room. In the center rested an old wooden chest. Dust covered every inch of it. On top of the chest lay a faded black and white photograph. Riyadh carefully picked it up. It showed a family, a father, a mother, a little girl, and standing beside them, a fourth person. But someone had completely scratched out the face with black ink. At the bottom of the photograph were the words, 1978. Nabil turned the photo over. Only one sentence was written on the back. "Never leave this house with someone you cannot truly recognize." At that exact moment, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Not one pair, not two, many. Riyadh aimed his flashlight toward the darkness. In the distance, several human figures stood in a straight line. Their heads were lowered. None of them moved. Yet every few seconds, they were somehow closer. No footsteps, no movement, yet the distance kept shrinking. Riyadh felt a chill run down his spine. He whispered, "We're not alone in this house." Then, from the far end of the corridor, a familiar voice called out, "Riyadh, don't you recognize me?" Riyadh's heart stopped, because the voice was his own. Riyadh's entire body went numb. The voice that echoed through the corridor was his own. The same tone, the same accent, even the same breathing. Slowly, figure stepped out of the darkness. Nabil and Siam instinctively backed away in horror as the flashlight illuminated its face. It was Riyadh. The same face, the same clothes. Even the tiny mole on his right cheek was identical. The two Riyadhs stood silently, staring at each other. Neither of them spoke. After several long seconds, the other Riyadh smiled. "Don't trust them." The real Riyadh frowned. "Who are you?" The figure answered calmly, "I am you, and you are me." Suddenly, the air inside the house became unbearably heavy. Every old portrait hanging on the walls began to shake violently. Nabil whispered, "Riyadh, don't look into his eyes." But it was already too late. The other Riyadh slowly floated closer. His feet never touched the ground. He wasn't walking. He was gliding through the air. He stopped only inches away, then quietly placed his hand on Riyadh's shoulder. The instant their skin touched, countless memories flooded Riyadh's mind. He saw the house many decades ago, a happy family, a little girl laughing as she ran through the hallway. Then, darkness, one by one. People disappeared, and every single time, someone who looked exactly like them remained inside the house. Riyadh gasped and stumbled backward. His heart raced. At last, he understood the house's true secret. It wasn't haunted by ghosts. It didn't kill people. It replaced them. Suddenly, Nabil went completely silent. He stared into the darkness ahead. Siam asked nervously, "What is it?" Nabil slowly raised a trembling hand, pointing down the corridor. More figures were emerging from the shadows. Another Nabil, another Siam, another Arif. Perfect copies, every detail identical. They moved slowly toward the group. Their faces showed no emotion. Together, they spoke in perfect unison. "One house, 4 guests. By sunrise, 4 people will leave." Riyadh's heart skipped a beat. The words echoed inside his mind. 4 people will leave. But who said they would be the real 4? At that very moment, the distant sound of the dawn. Adan drifted through the darkness. Morning was approaching. Instantly, the entire house began to shake. Cracks spread across the walls. The floor trembled beneath their feet. From every corner of the house, hundreds of whispering voices surrounded them, repeating the same chilling words over and over. "Time is over. Time is over." The entire house shook violently. Chunks of plaster rained down from the ceiling. The old windows slammed against their frames over and over. Bang! Bang! Riyadh realized they had almost no time left. Standing before them were 4 identical copies. There was no way to tell who was real and who wasn't. Suddenly, a loose brick fell from the wall and hit the floor. Behind it was a small iron box hidden inside the wall. Nabil quickly pulled it out. Inside lay an old, rusty key and a folded piece of paper. Riyadh unfolded it with trembling hands. Written in faded ink were the words, "Everyone inside this house wishes to leave, but not everyone has the right to. If the wrong one escapes, the house will simply wait for its next guests." The 4 friends exchanged frightened glances. Before anyone could speak, their doubles began laughing. A cold, empty, inhuman laughter. It echoed through every hallway of the Red House. Riyadh tightened his grip on the key. "What does this unlock?" As if answering his question. A heavy wooden door creaked open somewhere below them. Creak. They hurried downstairs. Beneath the staircase, where no door had existed before, stood a massive black wooden door. Carved into it were only 2 words. "The final path." Riyadh inserted the old key into the lock. Click. The door slowly swung open. Beyond it stretched a long, narrow corridor. At its far end, they could see daylight. Freedom. Riyadh shouted, "Run!" The four friends sprinted toward the light, but only a few steps later, their doubles began running too. Now, 8 figures raced through the corridor. 4 real, 4 copies. As they ran, Riyadh noticed something terrifying. The copies made no sound, no footsteps, no breathing, nothing. They moved through the darkness in complete silence. The exit was only a few feet away. Suddenly, one of the copies grabbed Nabil's arm. Nabil screamed. Riyadh spun around. He watched in horror as the copy slowly began merging with Nabil. It was trying to replace him. Riyadh lunged forward and pulled Nabil away with all his strength. Instantly, the copy dissolved into darkness. From somewhere deep inside the house, a whisper echoed behind them. "Not today. We'll meet again." They didn't dare look back. They ran straight into the light. The next instant, all 4 collapsed onto the grass outside. Morning sunlight warmed their faces. Birds were singing. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Gasping for breath, they slowly turned around. The red house stood silently behind them, just as abandoned as before, as if nothing had ever happened. Nabil picked up his camera. With shaking hands, he played the final recording. The footage showed the 4 friends running out of the house, but then the camera captured one last image. Someone was still standing in the doorway. Slowly, the figure lifted its head. It was Riyadh. He looked directly into the camera. Then he smiled. The recording ended there. Dawn had broken. Somehow, Riyadh, Nabil, Siam, and Arif managed to escape the village and report everything to the local police. At first, no one believed their story. The officers assumed they had simply frightened themselves inside an abandoned house. However, after seeing the fear in their eyes, the police agreed to investigate. That afternoon, several police officers, 2 journalists, and a few villagers returned to the Red House with the 4 friends. But what they found left everyone speechless. The house looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. A thick blanket of dust covered every room. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had entered the house the previous night. Riyadh stood frozen. "We were here. This was the room." But the room they remembered was completely different. There was no broken mirror, no wooden chair, no hidden iron box. It was as if those things had never existed. One of the police officers laughed. "Maybe your imagination got the better of you." Riyadh wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because deep inside, even he no longer knew what was real. That night, the 4 friends returned to the city. None of them could sleep. 2:17 a.m. Riyadh's phone suddenly rang. It was a video call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. The screen showed something that froze his blood. It was the front porch of the Red House. The camera slowly moved forward, as though someone was walking inside. It climbed the staircase, then stopped outside the same room where the mirror had once stood. The door slowly creaked open. The room was empty, but written across the cracked wall, in fresh dark letters, was a new sentence. "All 4 of you came back. Did you really?" Suddenly, the camera spun around. A figure stood in the darkness. Slowly, it stepped into the light. It was Riyadh, but his eyes were completely black. He looked straight into the camera and whispered, "I'm still here." The call ended instantly. The following morning, Riyadh immediately called Nabil. No answer. He tried Siam. Nothing. Arif's phone was switched off. Around noon, Nabil finally called back. His voice was shaking. Riyadh, when I woke up this morning, someone had written a message on my bedroom mirror. Riyadh swallowed hard. What did it say? A long silence followed. Then Nabil whispered, "One of you hasn't changed yet." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the phone. It sounded as though the phone had fallen to the floor. Silence. Complete silence. Then, through the static, Riyadh heard an unfamiliar voice whisper, "Now, it's the last one's turn." The call disconnected. Slowly, Riyadh looked out his window. Across the street, someone was standing there from a distance. The figure looked exactly like him. It slowly raised one hand, waved, then disappeared into the crowd. Riyadh wasted no time. He rushed to Nabil's apartment as fast as he could. The front door was already open. An eerie silence filled the house. In the living room, Nabil sat alone. His head was lowered. The camera rested in his hands. Riyadh let out a sigh of relief. "You're okay?" Nabil slowly looked up. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His face was pale. He spoke in a calm, emotionless voice. "I'm alive, but none of us are the same anymore." Before Riyadh could respond, Nabil handed him the camera. "Watch the last recording." Riyadh pressed play. The footage began with the final moments inside the red house. The four friends were running toward the exit. But this version of the recording continued longer than before. The figure standing in the doorway, the other Riyadh, didn't follow them outside. Instead, he slowly turned around and walked back into the darkness of the house. Then, 3 more faces appeared in the broken upstairs window. Nabil, Siam, Arif. They stood behind the cracked glass with their hands pressed against it. It looked as though they were desperately trying to escape, but couldn't. Riyadh's hands began to shake. Then, if they're still inside, Nabil finished the sentence quietly. Who were the 4 people that came out? Before anyone spoke again, the camera screen suddenly filled with static. A new scene appeared, one that nobody had ever recorded. An old wooden table inside the upstairs room. 4 names had been carved into its surface. Riyadh, Nabil, Siam, Arif. Then, an invisible hand slowly dragged a streak of red across every name. One by one, they were crossed out. Beneath them, 4 new names began writing themselves. They were exactly the same names, but the handwriting was different. The screen instantly went black. Nabil looked at Riyadh, then quietly asked, "Do you know today's date?" Riyadh answered without thinking. "October 12th. Nabil slowly shook his head. "No, it's still that night." Confused, Riyadh pulled out his phone. The screen displayed October 11th, 11:47 p.m. His heart nearly stopped. That was impossible. They had watched the sun rise. They had spoken to the police. They had returned to the city. So where had the entire day gone? Suddenly, every light inside the apartment went out. Darkness consumed the room. Then, a familiar voice whispered through the blackness. "You never left the house." A door slowly creaked open. Riyadh turned toward the sound. Beyond the doorway, he saw it again, the endless corridor of the red house. Riyadh stood frozen. Before him stretched the same endless corridor, the same aged walls, the same freezing air. Only one question echoed inside his mind. Did we ever leave this house at all? Nabil broke the silence. I think everything changed the moment we stepped inside that night. At the far end of the corridor, a door slowly opened. Brilliant white light poured out from within. The 4 friends cautiously walked toward it. Inside the room stood an old wooden table, resting upon it. a thick, dust-covered ledger. Riyadh carefully opened the book. On the very first page were the words, "Everyone who enters this house has their name written here. Only those who recognize the truth are allowed to leave." He turned the pages. Hundreds of names filled the book. Beside some names, one word was written, "Returned." Beside many others, another word appeared, "Stayed." At the very end of the book, 4 names were written, Riyadh, Nabil, Siam, Arif beneath them. A blank line. Suddenly, letters slowly began appearing on the empty space. One word. Decision? At that very moment, the room shook violently. Old family portraits crashed from the walls and shattered across the floor. The people inside the photographs slowly faded away. Riyadh finally understood. The true power of the Red House wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was fear. The house trapped anyone who surrendered to it. But those who faced the truth could find the way out. Riyadh slowly closed the ledger, then looked at his friends. "We're leaving." Together. The 4 of them walked toward the glowing doorway. Behind them, hundreds of voices cried out at once. "Stop! Come back! Stay with us!" None of them looked back. They kept walking. As soon as they reached the doorway, a blinding white light swallowed everything. Riyadh slowly opened his eyes. He was lying on dry grass outside. Morning sunlight warmed his face. Beside him, Nabil, Siam, Arif. All 4 were alive. Villagers surrounded them. The old man they had met before stepped forward. Looking at them quietly, he said, "You survived." Riyadh slowly stood up. He turned toward the Red House one last time. It stood exactly as before, silent, empty, lifeless. The police searched the entire house again. They found nothing unusual. Only one faded sentence hidden beneath decades of dust on an upstairs wall. "Only those who conquer their fear will find the way." The 4 friends never returned to the Red House. They never uploaded the footage. Years later, the abandoned house was demolished. A brand new home was built in its place. No strange incidents were ever officially reported again. But even today, a mysterious 7-second video occasionally appears on social media. It shows the upstairs window of the old Red House, just before it was demolished. 4 young men stand silently behind the glass. Slowly, they turn toward the camera, and just before the video ends, one of them smiles. No one knows who recorded it. No one has ever proven whether it is real or simply another legend. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more mysterious tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening. May Allah protect you all. Take care, and always stay on the side of goodness. See you in the next story.